As the French Navy was first deploying their Clemenceau-class aircraft carriers in the early 1960s, they wanted to get a new air superiority fighter to operate from them. The existing Aquilon, a locally built version of the de Havilland Sea Venom, was quickly becoming obsolete, so several foreign and domestic options were being considered. After a fairly short evaluation process, the American F-8 Crusader was chosen as the new carrier jet for the French Navy, and an order for 42 aircraft was placed. There were a number of differences in the French jets compared to the F-8E that they were based on, including changes to the armament system, a different set of radios and avionics, as well as modifications to the variable incidence wing to improve takeoff and landing performance. Over the years, the French Crusaders were upgraded several times. Eventually, they received compatibility with more advanced air-to-air missiles like the Magic II, a radar warning receiver, new afterburner units, and upgraded navigational equipment. Although the French Navy deployed the F-8 operationally for about 35 years, and they flew combat-ready sorties on many occasions, their use ended up being limited to air escort duties, with only one weapons-hot air interception mission ever being flown. French Crusaders never engaged in any actual combat, and were flown almost until the year 2000 when they were finally retired along with the aircraft carrier Foch. The jet was replaced operationally by the Rafale, operated from the carrier Charles de Gaulle. What we get in War Thunder is the F-8E FN, a naval jet fighter in Rank 7 of the French Air Tree at Battle Rating 10.0. This was actually one of the first planes I ever reviewed on the channel, but we're taking a fresh look in 2025 in my modern review format. This jet doesn't get a ballistics computer, and doesn't get any defensive systems, but it does get the AN/APQ-104 radar set. This is a fairly basic I-band radar with no advanced modes, only 2 range presets for the scope, and only BVR targeting. I discuss the implications of this a bit later. For loadouts, you get a small selection of air-to-air missiles, and generally you'll only be carrying 2 at a time. Unfortunately, this jet doesn't have custom loadouts yet. Your entry-level missile, and the only one you can take 4 of, is the AIM-9B Sidewinder. This is a very basic weapon with limited performance, and to be frank, it's just not competitive at this BR. Your upgraded dogfight weapon is the Matra R550 Magic 1. This is a 35G rear aspect heatseeker that does pretty well in close-in fighting at this BR bracket. Your larger missiles with slightly longer range are the Matra R530 and R530E. The R530E is a rear aspect infrared missile with fairly average performance, but you really won't use it too much, while the R530 uses semi-active radar homing and ends up being a really strong weapon at BR 10.0. In terms of its flight performance, this version of the Crusader retains the excellent attributes of the others. It has reasonably fast acceleration at this BR, and has a good rate of climb. The F-8 is supersonic, but its maximum speed is a tiny bit lower than some of the other jets in this BR range, and a few of your opponents will be able to outrun you or run you down. The dogfight agility of this jet is generally pretty good, with one major caveat that hopefully is fairly obvious from the footage. You have to maintain your airspeed. Now, this is true of a lot of the jets in this BR range, but if your speed drops below around 400 kilometers an hour, the maneuverability is going to decline significantly. That isn't all bad news though, as again, the engine power and acceleration is fairly good, and you can generally regain lost airspeed without too much hassle, and this can provide a little bit of an edge over a lot of the jets you fight against. In addition, this jet has combat flaps that it can throw out at almost any subsonic airspeed. This can boost your turn rate by a noticeable amount, but it also impacts your energy retention, and you're going to drop a bit more airspeed in those tighter turns. But speaking generally, you should try to keep your speed above around 650 kilometers an hour whenever possible when you're performing horizontal maneuvers. The last thing to mention is that in the past, this jet had really serious problems with wing rips and structural failures in high G turns. That no longer seems to be the case, and in preparing this review, I didn't run into any wing rip issues, even with the control boosters equipped. Before I get into tactics with this jet, I want to give a quick shout out to Gunny Stewart AR in the clip that you're watching right now. At the end of the match, as my team was going in to land, refuel, and rearm, this guy came out of nowhere from behind the terrain and jumped about 5 of us, myself included, who were out of energy set up to land or were already on the ground. If he had been in a better jet, or maybe had a couple of rocket pods, he would have wiped all of us. Seriously, good play, dude. Anyway, when you take the F-8E FN out on air battles, your choice of loadouts is generally going to impact and inform how you play the jet. You can fly out with a pair of Magic Wands and go for conventional dogfighting at lower medium altitudes. That absolutely works, and it works pretty well in this jet. My own personal preference, though, is to take a pair of R-530s. Very few aircraft at this BR carry semi-active radar missiles, and a lot of players who are in jets with countermeasures don't even bother to fly out with any chaff. My usual mission profile is to climb out and go for an interception or two up at higher altitudes, and then, after using my missiles, look for targets of opportunity to gunfight with. The R-530s aren't just good for high altitude though, and they actually work pretty well in short-range tail chases, vertical launches, or even coming in from above, even against moderate ground clutter. The limiting factor, though, is the Crusader's radar. The radar in this jet only has BVR targeting, and it doesn't get any advanced modes, and your only 2 scope ranges are 37 and 74 kilometers. This can make it a little difficult to read the display when you're engaging targets at close range, and despite the lack of advanced features, it can make operating the radar set in a dogfight a little bit cumbersome. This thing badly needs ACM targeting, but doesn't get it. In terms of ground attack, don't bother. You can use the cannons to pop light ground targets at the end of a match when there's nothing else left to do, or when you're still grinding upgrades. But generally speaking, this plane just isn't equipped for ground pounding. The F-8E FN is an air superiority fighter through and through. Now, visually, this Crusader is still a good-looking jet, and the variable incidence wing is well animated, and it's just an awesome feature. No custom skins or anything though, but I still enjoy having it up on the screen. Now, landing this thing is something you'll absolutely want to practice. The variable incidence wing is linked to the landing flaps, and it results in the jet coming in with a very flat horizontal nose attitude, and it can really feel like you're having trouble getting the nose down on final approach. I generally try to set down with all 3 wheels at once, and you can safely deploy gear and landing flaps at about 425 kilometers an hour. There isn't a drag chute, and the undercarriage is pretty narrow, so when you set down on a regular runway, expect a long, flat landing run. The cockpit has good visibility to the front and out to the sides, but basically none to the rear. The radar scope is in a good position, and even though the instrument panel feels a little cluttered, it only took me a few moments to find what I needed in VR. Generally, a good cockpit. To close out on the F-8E FN. This jet has great air-to-air weapons for its BR. Its radar is fairly good at medium-range search, and it's got really good flight performance. However, it doesn't have any defensive systems, its payload is limited, and the radar scope ranges are inconvenient. The final verdict on the F-8E FN is that this jet is a seriously underrated performer. And if you're going up the French air tree, you really need to spend some time with this one. With just a little bit of practice, it won't let you down. Highly recommended. As always, thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed this video, check out this other one.